Oh goodness, it's so good to be here because this group really inspires me. And I love coming down here. I love being here for the fourth time. And as some of you who've been here before know, Bill Campbell inspired me. And I got to be a little recipient of some of his mentoring and coaching over the years when I was going to interview him to write the book Multipliers. And as we finished that up, I got some tough talk from Bill. He's like, Liz, it's a good idea. Don't F it up. And it was longer than that, but it was strangely inspiring and motivating to me to be told, like, you know what, you have something good, like go the distance with it. Don't stop short. Like give this everything that you can. And he has inspired me in my work, and it's just an honor for me to be here with you. We get to spend 2 hours together. I am not going to do all the talking during those 2 hours. Some of you are probably worried about that. We are going to have a conversation together. I want to start our conversation with a moment in sports. And it's not a particular moment in sports, it's a recurring moment in sports. It's a moment I've seen hundreds of times, and my guess is you've seen this hundreds of times. Well, I've watched a lot of sporting events. It is not because I am a massive sports fan, it's because I'm a mom. And I got this like massive brood of kids. We got 4 kids, and I'm married to a former collegiate athlete who, of course, thinks his children will be collegiate athletes. And so they've been in all sports. I have to occasionally remind him, I'm like, okay, let's talk about the other 50% of the gene pool that our children receive. Like a little more on the scholar side than the athlete side, but whatever. We're going to take them to a bunch of games. And I have to admit, I have a really hard time watching what's happening on the field. Even with like my own kids out there, I can't focus on what's happening in the field because given what I do, I am watching the sidelines. And I watch the sidelines like a hawk. And I watch the coaches. And I watch the players. And I watch what they do off of the field. Now, here's the moment I want to take you to. You might go back, not to like in professional sports, or you see this in sometimes college. I want to go back to like high school sports, maybe even middle school athletics. It's a big game. There's a lot on the line for the team and the play, and it's a critical moment in this big game. And the play has come to a stop, and the coach has to decide who to put on the field. The coach looks around. There's a number of players available, a number of people that, he or she could put in, and there might be a number of really strong, capable athletic players, but the coach puts in one particular player. May not be the strongest, may not be the fastest, but it's the one who's going to get the job done. It's the one who understands the gravity of the moment. It's the one who's been paying attention, maybe when they were off the field. It's the one that still has his helmet on when they're not playing. That's one of the things I watch for. Who keeps their helmet on? Who keeps their eyes on the field? It's the one who's going to go in, make the play, get the job done, not as a glory moment, but to get the job done for the team. Now, this is one of, I suppose, the characteristics of what we call impact players out in the world of athletics, but there are impact players in the workplace. Now, if you ask virtually any manager, any leader in an organization, who are the people that you turn to in the moments that really matter? When you've got a high-stakes situation or a really critical piece of work, who do you look to? Like who can you kind of hand off a no-look pass to, and you know they'll be in position and they'll get the job done? And they do it in a way that builds up a team rather than tears down a team. So for the last few years, I spent my time studying the impact players of the workplace, trying to understand what is it that they do differently than other people. And in particularly, what do they do differently than other people who are equally smart, talented, and capable? Like in a room full of equally smart, talented, capable people, why is it that some people get the job done, add value, create impact, break through, and other people get stuck going through the motions? And so I'm trying to understand what are some of the small, even seemingly insignificant differences in how people think and act that ends up creating extraordinary differences in the impact that they have on organizations, on teams, on whole communities. Here's a little bit. I'm a researcher. I want to start as we kind of explore, in some ways, like the mindset, the anatomy, the way of thinking and working of these impact players. I'm a researcher. I want to just share with you kind of like just the elements of this research. Here's what we did. My team and I went out to 9 different organizations, all top employers, some of them here in the Bay Area. These are like the Salesforces, Target, NASA, Stanford Health and Hospital chain here was one of our 9 research organizations. And we went out to those 9 organizations and interviewed about 25 managers in each. It was 170 managers in total. And we asked each one of these managers to kind of scan across the people that they've led and managed over the year and identified 2 different people. Both smart, both capable, both hardworking, but one of whom was doing well. And we called these contributors, typical contributors, ordinary contributors, and then one of whom was making an extraordinary impact. And of course, I came to call them the impact players of the workplace. Now, I want to share with you just a little of what struck me right away as I'm, going through, more than 100 of these interviews, listening to how these managers, we asked them to describe what is it they do, what makes them different. What do they do differently than other people? What impact does it have on the organization? The first thing of note is that they described that these impact players tend to generate 3.5 times greater value than the other contributors on the team. Now, this is not 3.5 times more than low contributors, low performers in organization, or even people that average, just typical people on the team. And I was also struck by the way that these managers described those they deemed as impact players in the organization. How do you think they talked about them? We're gonna, this is gonna be a conversation today, so we might as well start right now. And we're not gonna pass microphones. And in fact, we're not gonna take turns. I'm just gonna ask you to practice the ancient art of shouting. And for some of you have been waiting like 2.5 years for this moment. And so I want you to just shout out a little bit of your thinking. How do you think they described these impact players? Like, how did they talk about them? Positive, driven. Yeah, aggressive, energetic. Yeah, passionate and capable. One of the things I was struck is not just the descriptors they had of these impact players, but sort of the way, like, the emotion behind it. Because they didn't talk about them as their employees. They talked about them more as their heroes. Almost like, hey, when I grow up, I want to be like Jack. Like, Jack's amazing. They talked about him as peers. They talked about him with deep respect, not just as employees. But I was equally struck at how the leaders talked about what I called the typical or ordinary contributors. Here's what they said about them, sort of an aggregate. When I looked across all the descriptors, what I noticed is they said these are people who do their job well. These are people, I heard this over and over, they would say, this is someone who's brilliant at their job. They do it well. These are people who take direction. They follow leadership. These are people who are leaders themselves. These are people who take responsibility. They take ownership. They take initiative. These are people who are focused on the goal. They're goal-oriented, and they stay focused. And these are people who carry their weight on teams. So I'm struck by this because doesn't this look like a pretty good profile? Isn't this someone you would want to hire? I mean, aren't these the kind of people you would want a dozen of these people working on your team? And as I really dug into this, here's what I began to see is that these ordinary contributors were absolutely stellar. They were stellar in ordinary times. But when the environment, the work, got a little bit chaotic, when there's a lot of ambiguity, when there's uncertainty, when things are starting to feel like they're outside of your control, this way of working and thinking fell short, and the individuals fell short. And these were the situations that the impact players handled fundamentally differently than other solid, rock solid kinds of contributors. And when I looked at all of these, I could put them in kind of 5 buckets. What the impact players handled differently were the messy problems of the workplace. These are problems that don't have clear owners. These are problems that sit in between the boxes on the org chart, where it's like, well, it's not really that department's job, it's not this department's job, it's not his job, it's not her job, it's kind of nobody's job, but yet it's important. When roles are unclear, when we know we're collaborating and we're supposed to work together, but we're not quite sure who's in charge of this project or this initiative or this meeting, when there's a leadership vacuum, or when there's what I call the ambient problems of the workplace, where the status quo is kind of, I don't know, less than efficient, but tolerable, like the leaky faucets of the work world, where it's like we just live with them because no one steps up to take the lead. The third situation they handle very differently is unforeseen obstacles, when something unprecedented, unplanned, just drops in your path, unwelcomed and unwanted. Now, I feel like we've all earned sort of advanced degrees in dealing with unforeseen obstacles over the last few years. They're the things that you couldn't have put a contingency plan in place for. Moving targets, where the situation is changing, the environment is changing, the needs are changing. When you start a project with one goal, with one aim, but the target shifts midway. It's like when you're shooting at a goal box, but the goal box is moving while you're taking the shot. And lastly, unrelenting demands, when the workload is increasing faster than the resource is increasing, when you get that sort of feeling like there's just more than I can humanly get done. When like you end your work week in some ways more behind than you started your work week. I call these everyday challenges because we encounter them all the time. These are the perennial challenges of the modern workplace. How many of these are you dealing with right now? By show of fingers, 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. Okay, I'm just going to look right here. We've got 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 4, 5, 4, 5, 5, 3, 4, 5. Like, these are in some ways inescapable problems. And when you leave one organization because of all of this nuisance, and you take a job somewhere else, what do you find when you arrive? More of the same. They're not big crises. These aren't like the impact players didn't distinguish themselves like with heroism in these like moments of crisis. They distinguished themselves and handle. It's my phone. They distinguished themselves in the everyday challenges of the modern workplace. But it's because of the way they handle these like micro challenges is the reason why they are entrusted with the big challenges and why we look to them in the moments that really matter. Okay, here's my question for you. Which one of these 5 challenges, I'm assuming everyone's got one of them. Is there someone who's kind of living on Easy Street that doesn't have one of these right now? I don't. I've got a whole set of them. Which one is most pressing to you? Will you turn to the person next to you, maybe in 2, if you need to, if the numbers work out, a group of 3? Would you just describe one of these challenges, the one that is most pressing to you right now? My hope is by the time we're done with our time together, that maybe you have some additional ways that you might tackle that challenge. Would you we're just going to start with a quick discussion of this, like a minute each. Just describe the nature of the challenge. You've got 2 minutes with the partner. Go. Is there a handheld I can use? Okay, why don't you take another 30 seconds? Did anyone not get to person number 2? Like person number 1's challenges were so compelling that you didn't get to person number 2? Does anyone need 30 more seconds? Okay, take 30 seconds. Make sure person number 2 describes one of their everyday challenges. Go. Okay, if I could ask you to pause that conversation, there is going to be an opportunity to continue it later. What I want to do is I want to go through each of these 5 everyday challenges. And I want to focus on the choice point, because each one of these challenges involves a dilemma. What do you do? What do you do when a problem is messy? What do you do when it's not your responsibility, but yet it's important? What do you do when it's not your job, when it's not their job, like when there's no coverage for this? And it's a choice. Each one of these offers this choice point between a choice that is totally reasonable and good and responsible, and the way that most of our organizations are set up to operate, versus the choice that the impact players take, which is a choice that isn't necessarily harder. It's just a choice that is more courageous. It's a choice that is a little bit more assertive. It's a choice that involves taking greater agency and control over a situation that feels very much out of your control. So I'm going to go through each one of the 5 and describe, like, what do the contributors tend to do? What do the impact players tend to do? I've kind of gathered together some of my favorite little GIFs and to illustrate the difference between the two. So what do you do when the problem is messy? Do you stay in your lane, or do you venture out? Do you venture out into no man's land, where no one is really owning this problem? See, in these situations, the contributors, they do their job. And again, they often do their job brilliantly. But it can end up looking like this, like so focused on doing your job and what's in front of you that you can't see what's happening around you. You're missing the action, but yet you're doing your job brilliantly. Okay, versus in these situations, the impact player isn't just doing their job. They're doing the job that's needed. They're paying attention to what's happening around them. They leave the confines of their responsibilities, their job description, their place in the organization, to go out and be of service to the most important needs of the organization. They're extending themselves. I want to share with you just a few of the impact players that I had a chance to study and write about and profile. And I want to start with, I have to admit, like, I'm not supposed to have favorites. It's like my kids. I have 4 kids. I'm not supposed to have favorite, but we all know I have a favorite. We all know which one I'm saving first. And they all think it's not them, which is like, I had a good gig going in. Other than, like, some of you have, I've talked with some of you about my son, Christian. Have I not? I had to one day say, Christian, you're my favorite. He's like, Mom, you're not supposed to have favorites. I'm like, oh, you're absolutely my favorite. And I'm like, you want to know why? He says, yeah. I'm like, because if you weren't my favorite, you would absolutely be my least favorite. So I have made you my favorite. Okay. This is for certain one of my favorite of the impact players. This is Jojo Mirador, and he works as a scrub tech. Now, the job of a scrub tech is, these are people that you generally don't see if you're in the OR, because you're out by the time this person is doing their job. This is the person that is operating the instrument table. Now, they're not operating. Their job, of course, is to have the instruments ready to go, sterile, hand the instruments to the surgeon when the surgeon asks for them. It's the lowest skill level, lowest qualification there in the OR. JoJo does his job differently than other scrub techs. See, when the surgeon shows up, they always say, if JoJo's in the OR, you just know the procedure's going to go well. And he has those instruments sterile, and he has them laid out, but he has them laid out in the order that they're going to be needed. Because he finds out what's the procedure we're doing, and if he's not familiar with it, goes on the internet, reads everything he can, lays them out so that they're ready to go. Most scrub techs are listening for the instrument that's being asked for. Not JoJo. What's he doing? He's watching. He's watching the hands of the surgeon. What are they doing? What's their next move going to be? Let me have that instrument ready to go before they even ask. And when the surgeon asks JoJo for an instrument, he doesn't always hand over the one that they asked for. One of the surgeons told me, they're like, oh yeah, you're not necessarily going to get the instrument you asked for, but you're going to get the one you need. See, he works at the Santa Clara Valley Medical Center, which is part of the rotation of the Stanford health system, the Stanford Medical School, which means those surgeries are being done by residents who don't necessarily know how to do this very well, who are nervous, who are wobbly, who are kind of like having to kind of step up and do something that they're still not entirely sure how to do. And so when they don't ask for necessarily the best instrument, the right instrument, JoJo hands them over the one that he knows they really need. And he doesn't insist. How does he say it? He's like, why don't you try this? I think this might work better for you. You can imagine how the residents feel about JoJo. How do you think the senior surgeons feel about this scrub tech who's kind of directing them on what instrument they should use? He said, they kind of appreciate it. They love it. We usually have a good laugh. And he said, in fact, before the really tricky procedures, they come to me and say, hey, JoJo, here's what we're doing today. What are the instruments do you think are going to do this job best? Turns out there's regular conflict in the scheduler's office as the surgical teams line up to say, no, we need JoJo in OR. No, we need JoJo. And they've come up with this professional agreement, which is whoever has the most complicated surgery is the one who gets JoJo. See, while the ordinary contributor and the ordinary contributor mindset, they're doing their job and in some ways doing it brilliantly, the impact players of the workplace are doing the job that needs to be done. The one the client needs them to do, the one the patient needs to do, but they're not doing it in a way that alienates them from the team. They're doing it in a one that rallies the team. Okay, what do you do when roles are unclear? What do you do when you're in a meeting and it's like a group and you need all these minds and collaborating, but you can't figure out who's in charge? I feel like half the meetings that I've gone to in my career, it's like unclear, like who's the boss of this meeting? Like what happens in organizations when there's no boss? When there's not a clear owner or responsibility? See, I call this the hungry cat problem because this is how it goes in my hat. I'm like, okay, kids, whose job is it to feed the cats? Who's on that chore? Oh, we'll all feed the cats. What happens when everyone is responsible for feeding the cats? Fat cats or skinny cats? Oh, you get skinny cats. Yeah, see, what do you do when the role's unclear? What do you do when there's this problem that's been just festering in the organization, but everyone's learned to live with it? And somebody needs to step up and take charge. Here's what we find. In these situations where leadership is unclear, the ordinary contributor, they're waiting for direction. They're willing leaders. They're ready leaders. And in some ways, it looks a little bit like this, like, hey, I'm ready to step up, but you've got to anoint me. It's like I'm waiting to be knighted before doing something nobly. They're waiting for the boss to clarify roles. They're waiting for somebody to send out a notice that says, oh, by the way, Brian, he's in charge. In some ways, it's a reasonable way to work. In these very same situations, the impact players think very differently about these fuzzy leadership roles, about these leadership vacuums, because in these situations, they're not just willing leaders and ready leaders. They're assumptive leaders. When they see that vacuum, they step up and they lead. But they're not the kind of players who always are leading. They're not the kind that always needs to be in the lead. They're people who are willing to step up and take the leadership of an initiative, of a project, of a meeting, of a conversation, of a difficult problem. But as soon as their service is done, they step back and they follow others with the same energy that they step up. They step up, but then they step back. And it looks more like the model of leadership of flock of migrating geese. That flies in this V formation, which scientists say allows the flock to fly over 70% further than solo flight. And, we probably all know how these, I'd never studied it, but I know that bird in the lead doesn't always stay in the lead. Like one bird will go in, take that lead position, break the wind, create drag for the rest of the flock, but they don't stay there till they exhaust themselves. No one's ever seen like a Canadian goose fall from the sky, exhausted. See, what do when their leadership, when they've served the flock? They roll back and the next bird goes in and takes a lead. It's a rotating model of leadership. In some ways, the model of and it allows organizations to move faster with greater agility. In some ways, the model of leadership we need in most of our organizations, look, right now, it's something we probably learned in 3rd grade. How did leadership work when you were in 3rd grade? The teacher was the boss? Not the smart teachers. Didn't they have kind of a chart up on the chalkboard that had the duties for the classroom? Who was going to lead the team out to recess? Who was going to bring them back? Who was going to distribute the paper? And you had the job of being like recess leader one week, didn't you? Then you didn't necessarily have it the next week. And it's funny, when you know you're not going to be the boss next week, how do you tend to behave? Yeah, a little bit better. And this kind of leader is one that it's volunteer-based. It's about leading by demand rather than by command. It's letting a situation invite you into leading. And sometimes it involves inviting yourself into spaces that you weren't necessarily invited into. Sometimes it involves taking a lead in a situation that it's really maybe not your place. One of my other favorites of the impact players is actually someone I didn't get to meet before the book, but this is Nadia Popovichi. I am hoping somebody read about her. This was a story told. I read it in the New York Times. I saw it on ESPN a bunch. Anyone know Nadia Popovichi? She's 22 years old, big fan, big ice hockey fan, hometown, Seattle, big fan of the Seattle Kraken. Some of you might recognize the headgear here. Did anyone? Yes, what do you remember about her? We'll go here and then here. Tell me what you remember. Shout it out nice and loud.
I remember her being at a game and the opposing team player, she noticed a lump on his neck or something like that, and she let us know that she reached out to the team and got in contact and said, look, you need to get this checked out.
Yeah, you need to get this checked out. She is at a game. She's an aspiring, thank you for that. Because it was something like that on his neck. She's 22 years old. She's an aspiring doctor. She wants to go to medical school. So she's done some volunteer work to kind of like get that application ready to go to medical school. She's worked as a volunteer nurse's assistant. She's at a game with her family. She's sitting behind the player box, not for the Kraken, but for the opposing team, which in this case was the Vancouver Canucks. And she sees this guy, Brian Hamilton, who's not one of the players. He's the assistant equipment manager. So I don't know what that job is, but I'm sure it involves a lot of sweaty equipment. And she sees on the back of his neck, what was it? It was a mole. It was like, and she looks at that and she's like, that doesn't look good. That doesn't look right. See, working as a nurse's assistant, she had learned some of the signs of troublesome moles and cancerous moles. She sees it and she's concerned, what would you do? Or I maybe better ask, like, what would most people do? Nothing. Yeah, most people would probably go, wow, that doesn't look good. I hope he has a roommate. Like I hope somebody tells him about this, like he needs to go see a doctor. That's not what she does. What does she do? She types out a message on her phone, types it out. It's a bit of a reenactment, this picture, and then she highlights in red keywords like mole, neck, cancerous, doctor. And what does she do? She takes her phone, puts it up to the plexiglass, and she's just like banging on the glass, trying to get his attention. Does it work? Not really. I mean, he kind of ignores her. And she goes home from the game feeling a little bit, defeated or what. Well, he starts thinking, Wonder what that was about. Maybe she wasn't crazy. He goes to the doctor. The doctor tells him that is indeed a cancerous mole. And 2 years from now, that would probably be a game-ending kind of cancer for you. He's like, that young woman saved your life. So through social media, he and the team reach out. They find her. They invite her back down to a game, and during in between periods, spotlight her. The Kraken and that opposing team, they pool their resources together, and they award her a $10,000 scholarship to medical school. But I wanted to just go back to that moment where we see something wrong. But it's not our job. It's not our place. Like, we're not the boss of that person. We're not that person's friends. Like, what do you do? This is the mentality of the impact players, which is, I should do something. Like, why not? Why not me? I'm no doctor, but you know what? Why not me? Okay, unforeseen obstacles. Like, what do you do when something beyond your control drops in your path unannounced? It's above your pay grade. It's out of your control. It's not your doing. In some ways, it's an obstacle that's bigger than you. What do you do? What's the reasonable thing to do? What happens every day inside organizations? What do people do when something out of their control drops in their way? Nothing I can do. And like, what's the positive thing you can do is at least you can tell the boss. And you escalate it. They escalate issues. They do it quickly and they do it helpfully, but it looks a little bit like this. It's like they're going along just fine. They get to obstacles like, woo, not mine. And they hand the obstacle off to other people. In these same situations, the impact players, they just finish stronger. Now I want to take us to not just a recurring conceptual moment in sports. I want to take us to a very specific moment in sports. I want to talk about Stanford versus Cal. This is going to be a little bit sacrilegious here on this campus. This is a play that is so stunning, so famous, it's simply referred to as the play. Okay, this happened back in November of 1982. Does anyone here remember the play? I was a freshman in college in this moment. I remember when this happened. Anyone want to give us kind of a little bit of a recounting of how this big game, which of course is a rivalry between Stanford and Cal. I know some of you probably played for these schools. And of course, the coveted prize for winning the big game is the Axe, the Stanford Axe trophy. Does anyone want to tell us about how this game ended? Maybe the last 8 seconds of the game? I'll get you started. I'll get you... Yeah, like a little bit of a hint of what's going on. This is the game where the band sort of stole the show, right? So I'll get you started on this. Someone else, feel free to add to this. You will describe how this play unfolds better than I will. But it is late in the fourth quarter. Cal is winning 19-17. And then Stanford scores a field goal, putting them 1 point ahead with 8 seconds left to go. Stanford is now kicking off to Cal. They kick low and short. And a player named Kevin Moen catches it and starts to run it on the 45-yard line. So, of course, now he has to run 55 yards in a single play to win this game. What happened? Does anyone want to describe it? I've got a microphone here if anyone wants to. I'm sure you can do a better job than I do, although I've probably watched this film like 52 times. Any takers? I mean, I was kind of excited knowing the room that I was coming to. I'm like, I'm not going to have to tell this story. And we have the game field here. Thank you, Andrew, for your help with this. How do those 4 seconds unfold? And how did the band end up stealing the show? Why don't you keep that on?
I'm a former Stanford football player, so thank you for
So
bringing
I'm
this
sorry
wonderful memory up.
I was throwing salt in the wound.
Yeah, I've seen it a few times, and I'm sure we've all seen it, but basically Cal receives the ball, they return the kickoff, there's a number of different laterals, some theoretically probably not legal.
So the Stanford contingency says they're still whinging and moaning about this moment, but keep going.
Yeah, and I believe this might have been like John Elway's last year. Didn't make a bowl game, never beat Cal. Like so there's some extra stuff in the mix there, but
more from the Stanford perspective, I might add.
Yeah. So as this play is happening,
Berkeley mom.
As this play is happening, the Stanford band comes on the field. The Cal ends up taking the ball into the end zone. I think the guy spikes it on top of one of the Stanford band members' heads at the end or something. And Cal ends up winning the game.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. So Moen catches this, laterals to player number 2, who advances, a yard, is tackled by Stanford defense, laterals, back passes it to a third player who's tackled by the Stanford defense. And it's going down. Of course, this is when the fans, this is played up in Cal Stadium, up in the hills of Berkeley. The Stanford fans erupt. The Acts Committee starts to take the field. The notoriously raucous Stanford band descends upon the field to celebrate. But the game actually isn't over in this moment because that third player, before he hits the ground, so the Berkeley team says, laterals it to another player who advances 20 yards, is tackled, and while he's following, laterals it back to Kevin Moen, who's got the perfect last name for what is about to happen, because then he runs 30 yards, weaving and darting through the Stanford band players, and then crosses the finish line, and of course, winning the game, and then making friends with the trombone player, and they ended up friends for life. Okay, and so if the video works on this, here we go.
With it, and he does. Ball comes loose, and the Bears have to get out of bounds. Rogers along the sideline, another one. They're still in deep trouble at midfield. They tried to do a couple of... The ball is still loose as they get it to Rogers. They give it back now to the 30. They're down to the 20. Oh, the band is out on the field. He's going to go into the end zone. He's going to the end zone. The Bears have won. The Bears.
Yeah, and what precedes is just this hysterical screaming of the commentator, which is what makes this so wonderful. For me, this play is a metaphor. See, there's a lot of really smart, capable professionals who play a good game. And they take action and they move things done, but they stop and they celebrate before they've actually got things across the finish line. And one of the differentiators between the ordinary contributor and the impact player is the impact players are finishers. They have this completion gene. They get it done, all the way across the finish line, and they do it without being prompted, reminded, sort of cajoled, nagged to get it all the way done. And they don't just finish, they finish stronger. They don't do it by heroically, carrying this obstacle across the finish line and collapse. They do it in a way that actually renders them with greater strength than they started. If I had to pick a mascot for this way of thinking and this way of working, it's the Husky Malamute sled dog and the sled dog team. It's this breed of sled dogs that can finish this multi-day endurance challenge like the Iditarod, and those dogs can finish that race with the same vitals that they started it with. They're built for endurance, and they find that the sled, and they don't do it solo. They just stay in place. They hold on. Instead of handing it off to a higher up, they just hold on to the responsibility longer. And instead of doing it solo, they rally resources. Instead of handing it to the senior VP in the organization, they're like, hey, boss, we got a big problem. Here's what I need from you for us to get this done. And they stay in charge, and they finish stronger. They find with these sled teams that the ones that win a race are often the ones that just finished another race. What's the difference between finishing and finishing stronger? What's the difference? Yeah, it's about keeping momentum. Yeah, because a lot of people can finish something and then it, collapse in exhaustion or end up burnt out or bitter. I got it done, but I'm injured. I'm hurt by this. How do you handle it differently to actually finish stronger than you started? We know what this looks like in the sports world, in athletics. being made stronger through the challenge. But what does it look like in the workplace? Yeah, grateful for the obstacle, grateful for the challenge. Yeah, absolutely. What else? Like, how do we handle the obstacle differently that we end up stronger?
You get the team around it instead. You bring people with you.
Yeah, you don't try to do it alone. You eschew the hero moment and you rally resources. You call in for reinforcement. You do it together. How else do you handle it so that you finish stronger, not weaker?
You have foresight, so know things are going to happen. It's not going to be easy.
Yeah, you normalize problems. I think it was Theodore Rubin, a psychoanalyst, said, having problems isn't a problem. It's only thinking that having problems is a problem. You know, it's one of the things that we found with these impact players is that they start things assuming there's going to be obstacles, assuming that all of that mess is just part of the process. My husband and I just came off a 10-day trek through around Mont Blanc, and after day one, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm not finishing this thing. This looks great on paper, but I'm not sure I'm actually going to finish this thing because I was prepared for the vertical. I don't know, somehow like it was 112 miles, 34,000 vertical feet, and I'm like, okay, like that was all conceptually fine. But then the first day, I was very prepared for the 2,000 up, but not entirely prepared for the 5,000 down. Fell twice, was wobbly, kind of hurt my ankle, and I think this was a moment where I fell off trail. My husband, because he's a decent human being, offered to carry my pack. And it was pretty tempting. I cannot convey how much I wanted to hand him my backpack, on this trek, and he was willing to carry it. And I think it must have been my pride, just like the idea that we were going to be passed by people who would see my husband carrying 2 backpacks and me carrying no backpacks. And I didn't really want to be fodder for conversation on this trail. You kind of are doing it with other people. You meet people along the trail and I said, no, I'm gonna hold on to my pack. And you know what I noticed is day 1 was miserable. Day 2, we got it done. By day 3 and day 4, I'm like, you know what? Actually, we have far more vertical today. We have more mileage today. We were doing 5,000 vertical, 12 miles in a day. And I'm like, but strangely, I feel stronger. I was made stronger by this challenge. I thought there was no way I could make it to day 10. But yet I made it through day 10 feeling invigorated. Part of what made that work was not just holding the pack, is pacing myself. And saying, you know what? I'm just going to slow down, but I'm going to get this done. How do you help a team not just finish a job, a project, but how do you help a team finish stronger than they started? Okay, number 4, what do you do when the targets are moving? What do you do when you start a project with a target or with a budget, or you get a sales quota, and then something changes and your sales quota goes up and your budget goes down? And the aim that you started with is not the aim of today. See, in these cases, the ordinary contributors, they tend to stick to what they know. This was the goal I was given. They've got grit, perseverance, and stick-to-itiveness, but it looks a little bit like this, which is this, I'm going to persist for the sake of persisting. And they see it as heroic and stoic. But what do you do when the world around you is changing? Yeah, you adjust, and this is what we find the impact players that do. They weren't these kind of leaders who were change makers, asking the organization to change. They were changing themselves. They were adaptive. They were seeking guidance. It's like they finished a day of work, went to bed, woke up the next morning, and assumed that while they were sleeping, something changed. And so every day you've got to start with, okay, what are we trying to do? Is this still the right target? Is it a reasonable target? They ask for feedback, they ask for guidance, and they make adjustments. For me, no one, and it's very much like this chameleon that is adapting and changing to its environment. Of all the people I work with, no one embodies this better than my very dear friend, Sean Vanderhoffer. He was here 3 years ago. Some of you were with him when he was sharing some of the items of multipliers. Monday he shows up. He shows up in my office dressed like this. And this, I think, is just the best representation of Sean because Sean doesn't take himself too seriously. This is how Sean works. When Sean begins a piece of work, he asks questions. What are we trying to accomplish? What's important? What does the goal look like? What are we trying to build here, Liz? And then he goes to work. And then he turns something in, maybe to me, one of our colleagues, our team members, and then he starts asking a different set of questions. Questions like, is this what you need? Is it hitting the target? Are you getting what you want? In the rare cases where he is off target, it is so easy to tell it to him straight. You don't have to pump him up with like feel-good caveats. You don't have to give a feedback sandwich. You just tell him, Sean, this is not what we need. It's not right. How does he respond? Yeah, let me go fix that. And the next day he delivers it on target, a bullseye every time. In the 6+ years I've been working for Sean, I have never once had to sit down and give him feedback. Never once. Because he always beats me to it. He asks for feedback before anyone has a chance to give it to him. Okay, what do you do when demands are just unrelenting? What do you do when you've been carrying your weight, but it's just getting heavy? See, in these cases, the ordinary contributor, they look for relief. They look to their leaders for relief. They look to their team for relief, but in doing it, they end up adding to the burden of already overtaxed people. It's like, do you all know a colleague like this who just makes hard work really hard? Right, we all know the colleagues that come with the tax, like, okay, I really need their help. I'm gonna walk down to their office and ask for help, but it's gonna take 2 hours. And this is really a 2-minute question. Versus the colleague that when work feels heavy, they just make work light. They're easy to work with. They're low maintenance. They send short emails. When they're gonna forward you a big long chain of emails, what do? They don't just send it and you say, hey, what should we do? They write a summary. Hey, you know what? This chain reveals this issue. We have to decide A or B. They're people who offer like a rebate of time. They just make work light. Sometimes they lend a helping hand. Sometimes it's because they're easy to work with, but sometimes they just bring a sense of levity that allows a team to handle the really hard stuff. And I think maybe at its extreme, they just don't bring injury to work that is sort of injurious. Now, I want to go back 3 years ago. Some of you were here. Steve Young sat right here. Ronnie Lott sat right here. And Steve described what it was like to work with Reggie White, the great Reggie White, defensive end, Hall of Famer, 198 quarterback sacks. He described about like living in fear of Reggie White. The 6'5", 300-pound defensive end. Does anyone remember what Steve said? I was struck by it, and then I asked Mark if he could give me game film of that. And I went back and re-looked at what did Steve say about playing with Reggie White. I've got a few pictures here. Oh man, I just completely missed the make work light. I'll come back to it. Does anyone remember this? What did Reggie do when he was coming at Steve? Of course, Reggie's job is the sack. And he said, you know what? I lived in fear of him. He would come at me. He would come bursting down the field with all of this energy, intent on taking me down. Steve said, I could not only see him coming, I could hear him coming down the field. And I knew he was coming at me. But what did Reggie do when he made contact with Steve? He wrapped him up, got those big arms around him, twisted him, and landed so that Steve was on top of Reggie. And then what did he do, this man that was called the Minister of Defense? What did he do? When Steve was on the ground, Reggie would get up, reach out his hand, pull up Steve and say, hey, Steve, how you doing? Steve's like, not so great. Hey, how's your dad? I don't know, go ask him. Trying to complete a pass here. It's like, right now, we're living in a world where there's a lot of people opposing each other. And it's like, can you push your point of view? Can you push for what you want? But can you do it in a way that doesn't create injury for anyone else? There's adversaries inside our organizations. We compete. But can you do it in a way that doesn't create injury, that actually makes tough work feel light for others? Here's my question. The question is, what is at the core of these differences? What's at the core? When you look across the differences between how contributors operate and how the impact players operate, what's different about this fundamentally? And I would love to have you just shout this out. And there's no answer to this, just what do you notice? What's different fundamentally? It's intentional. It's this way of working that doesn't just go with the flow. It's a very intentional way of working. Nice and loud for me. Yeah, they're fostering change, and they're changing themselves. It's an adaptive way of working. What else is different about it?
Self-focused versus other focus.
Yeah, one is self-focused. It's almost like a self-preservation focus versus another focused. It's kind of like a servant form of contribution. You all probably heard of servant leadership. But it's a servant form of contribution, but it's not like, let me be your servant as much as let me serve. Let me serve where I can create value. And by putting your own ego as number two, what happens? I talked to 170 managers about how they talked about the impact players on their team. These were people who were in the spotlight. These were people who were given the most important assignments. These were people who were rewarded and well compensated. These were heroes of the organization. What else do you notice about this?
Maybe intellect versus instinct.
Intellect versus instinct. Yeah, they're not letting the intellect get in the way, but not also playing by instinct. Yeah? Okay, what else do you notice across? Yeah, the fear of failure is taking you over. It's a preservation way of working. Let me stay in my box. Let me not step up to lead till someone appoints me, anoints me of leading. Anything else you notice? And just what's different about these? And this might be a good time to say this isn't about person one versus person two. It's a mindset. It's a way of working. And my guess is that all of you have had experience working in this impact player mindset. And we're going to do that just next. So I want you to anchor to a time when you're like, oh, I was on the right. But I can tell you about all sorts of times where I was on the left, sort of going through the motions, stuck. It's a mindset that we tend to move in and out of. What do you notice is different?
Well, what I tell my team is there's problem finders and there's problem solvers. So I would say the left is problem finder and the right is problem solvers.
Yeah, I heard so many managers say these are people who are solving problems in the organization. As part of this research, and it's in the very back of the book in Appendix A, is we asked 170 managers, what is it that people do that you most love? And I also asked them, what is it that people do that you most hate, that really makes your job leading pretty miserable? And one of the things that we found was, it was either at the top of the list, it's really high on the list, is the things that managers most appreciate is that people who do things without being asked, and who anticipate problems and solve them before anyone even notices. And if you look at that list, if you open up to Appendix A and you look at that list of what managers most appreciate, one of the things that you might conclude is that bosses don't really like being bossy. In fact, most managers don't really want to manage. They'd much prefer someone who's managing themselves. Anything else you notice? Nice and loud? Yeah, it's accountability. It's taking accountability, but it's also operating with a greater sense of agency, which is, I don't need for someone to tell me I'm in charge for me to take charge. I don't need for someone to appoint me to lead. I can do that. I am operating with a sense of agency. I can take control of situations that look like they're out of my control. It's about, in some ways, they're control freaks, but in the best sense of it, taking control of situations. Here's what I'd like to ask you to do. Would you identify a time when you were in each mode? Back to a point in time. You could do this in athletics, but I would encourage you to try to working on a project, in a team, in an organization. Identify when you're in each one, and I want you to take a minute to first answer, just in your mind, piece of paper, when you were operating in each mode, what assumptions did you hold? What did you believe to be true? Second question is, what was it like? Describe work. Describe a typical work day, work week. What was your work experience like when you were in contributor mode versus impact player mode? And then lastly, what put you in this mode of working? What caused you to, let's say, we'll call it fall back into sort of this contributor mindset? And what actually put you over onto the impact player mindset? Would you take a minute or two and just jot down a few ideas? And then I'm going to ask you to discuss it with the person you were discussing with before. So whenever you're ready, some of you might want to keep writing down a few thoughts before discussing it. I know some of you are like, oh, I'm just going to talk this out rather than write this out. Would you take 4 minutes, 2 minutes per person, and just answer those 3 questions together, like contrast this. And if I could put an emphasis on one question, it would be what causes us to move between these modes of leading and contributing? Okay, so whenever you're ready, start that conversation. I'll give you a signal when we're about at like halftime, so person 2 gets a chance to go through theirs. I want to see if we can just pull out a couple highlights. So when you were in contributor mode, what were the assumptions that were governing the way that you worked, the way you operated, the way you led? What was the assumption? Somebody else was responsible, not my job. That my opinion doesn't matter. You know what, we're living at a time right now where it's very easy for us to say, there's some big stuff happening that's beyond our control. My opinion doesn't matter. What was the assumption when you were operating in impact player mode? What's the belief that's driving you? You believe that I have power. And that people want me to exercise my power. Like we often, power kind of gets a bad rap. But power is what gets things done. Like we need people inside our organizations to be powerful and to exercise their power every single day. What else were you thinking? What's governing your thinking?
See direct results from your actions.
Yeah, like my actions matter. Like I can draw a cause and effect line between what I did and what just happened. Right. What else are you assuming?
Invested in the success of the outcome. And not letting one, like not accepting it to be a failure. You got to figure out something.
Yeah, like this is kind of my success. Like it's not the organization's. Like, for me, this was a pretty easy mindset to start my career with because I joined Oracle when they were really young. And I'm like, man, if I didn't do my job, like something didn't happen. And I hope everyone has that experience. Like my work really matters. What else? Yeah, if I don't do it, someone else might not do it, which is actually quite true when you're operating in these messy spaces where it's not really anyone's job to go in and solve these problems. Like these are non-covered areas, obviously. Okay, what did the experience feel like? In a word or two, describe what it's like working in contributor mode. It's I didn't hear it, but it sounded good.
Groundhog Day.
It's Groundhog Day, just another day, just doing the same kind of things. It's frustrating, it's stagnating, it's mundane, it's a job, and it's easy in this mode to do. There's this like movement happening right now. I'm very troubled by it. Quiet quitting. Have you heard of this? It's like, hey, the organization wants too much from me. I don't matter. I think I'm just gonna like quit and stay. That's what quiet quitting is. And you know what? The orientation is like the organization doesn't deserve me going above and beyond, but I'm not worried about the organizations. They're going to find a way to extract something from us. You know who I'm worried about? I'm really worried about the people who quiet quit because they've just resigned themselves to a way of working that is Groundhog Day and not a great way to work. Okay, what was it like when you're in impact player mode? What did work feel like? It was rewarding. Energizing. It doesn't take energy, it gives energy. See, we have this mental model right now, there's this epidemic of burnout. It might be happening in your organizations. People are talking burnout. Everyone's burnt out. And it's so easy to assume that burnout happens when people are working too hard, when people have too much work. That can happen. Sometimes it does. There are some legitimate reasons why a workload would burn you out. But I think most of the cases when people burn out, it's not because they have too much work, it's because they're experiencing too little impact. Because people crave impact, right? And when you're having an impact, work feels invigorating, rewarding. It creates energy. It's like that regenerative braking, which is like, you know what, actually this friction is putting more energy back into the system. And I feel like we deserve a work experience like that, but it doesn't happen when we're just stuck going through the motions. Some of you may be thinking like, yeah, for me and my work experience, I also want you to be thinking about, what about the team you're on? And how do you lead so it creates that kind of work experience for everyone? It's not a burn-out experience, it's a build-up kind of experience. Okay, let me try to like wrap up this conversation about impact players by offering, I don't know, I think I gave them a cheesy name called Smart Plays, but it's basically stuff you can do to amplify your impact, stuff that you can do. If you feel like you've drifted off this path of impact, like, oh yeah, I might be kind of in contributor mode right now, what might you do to kickstart this back? Get yourself more over onto the right side of that list. The first is get on the agenda. And I don't mean get on the agenda for the management committee meeting. I mean figure out what the agenda of the organization is and then work on it. See, every organization has an agenda that says this is important, this is what we care about, this is what we're working on. And these are rarely written down. Do you know the agenda for your organization? How about the people who work for you? Do they know what the agenda is? What's important to the organization? What's important to your stakeholders? What's important to you? The most impactful people figure out the agenda and then they work on that. They don't pursue their own agenda. They don't necessarily follow their passion. Before I wrote the book, we were doing a little workshop about the agenda. We might have talked about this 3 years ago. And there was someone in this group, he's like, his face starts to like drain, and he's like, I don't think I'm working on the agenda. And then he described his work. He was a worship leader at a large, like a mega church. And I know some of you here are in the ministry, some of you have like pastoral kinds of roles. And he's like, yeah, I don't think I'm on the agenda. And the reason I know is because every week I send an email to his boss, who was the senior pastor, which described like, hey, here's what I did this week. And what do you think he got from those weekly emails? Nothing. Like crickets, like outer darkness, kind of like nothing. And he's like, yeah, I don't think I'm on the agenda. I'm not working on what's important to my boss because he would respond if I was. I said, okay, I want you to try one little simple thing. Some of you may choose to do this. I said, send that weekly email, and I want you to include 2 pieces of information and only 2 pieces of information. Number 1, I just want you to state very succinctly what you understand to be the agenda of the organization. Here's what I understand to be important. And number 2, I just want you to describe what you've done that week to further that agenda. Simple. He did it. What do you think he got in response? Yeah, he got a response, for starters. He said, yeah, like the senior pastor started to respond to my emails, and then I got encouragement and coaching and support. It's like, if you want to work on the path of impact, figure out the agenda, what's important. And what's important right now, I call it the win. What's important now? And make sure that you are working on the win. Number 2, you might need to invite yourself in. When I look back on, I spent 17 years at Oracle. When I look back on the important work I did, I don't think any of it was work that was given to me. It was all work I kind of raised my hand and volunteered for. And there's this moment, Oracle's about $25 billion company at the time. I am, I think, like the vice president of training for the company. I ran Oracle University. I was like the training leader for the company. And we had this one training program where it was this like week of strategic thinking, planning. We brought the executives in. They talked about this direction of this very global, complex, worldwide organization. You know, again, $25 billion in revenue. Taught them some leadership, like, you know, kind of like smack them on the butt, send them back out on the field to like go lead. And I thought it was like a very simple concept until there was a mutiny when everyone said, hey, that strategy that the executives are coming down to present, not clear. It's not very compelling either. It's kind of a jumble of ideas. How do we go back and tell our teams this? Well, it was kind of awkward the first session, to like, oh, executives, by the way, your strategy's not very clear. And it was even more awkward the second time. By the time we get to the third one, I'm like, okay, time out, guys. Like, we have a big problem. Like, we need to go back and like rethink and recast and like retell the story of our strategy. And finally, after a lot of haranguing of our senior leaders, are like, Liz, we got the message. So we scheduled a meeting of all of our product heads to like get together, compare notes, and see if we could crystallize the strategy. I kind of made that happen. I knew the meeting was happening. It was next week. Sort of checked it off my to-do list. Job done. And then I'm like, I should probably go to that meeting. I think I could actually be helpful. Because what these guys had to do was take a lot of really complex technology and ideas and boil it down to sort of a clear, simple message. I'm like, yeah, I'm pretty good at that. So I just decided to show up. I'm more junior than all of the people in this room. I show up, I get to the meeting early, take a seat, and the product executives come in one by one. Now, in a software company, where do you think the power center is, the product execs or the training leader? Okay, so they're coming in one by one, and they see me, and they're like, hi, Liz. Like, a little surprised to see me. But they're all like, hey, okay, good. The president comes in, someone I worked with a lot, and he's like, a little surprised to see me. He's like, cool. The head of the database division, like the most powerful, product executive in the company, comes in and he's like, what are you doing here, Liz? He's like, this is a product strategy session, and like, you run training. And I remember this moment because I'm like, kind of just squared my shoulders, looked him in the eye. I'm like, Jerry, here's what has to happen. We've got to take a lot of complex thinking and boil it down to something simple. It's actually something that I'm pretty good at, and I thought I could be of help. He wasn't really convinced, but the president said, hey, Jerry, shut up. Liz is good at this, and I think she can be helpful. So it's good to have a little air cover there. And I knew Ray would want me in this meeting, and so then I just listen. I don't take over the meeting. I don't hijack the meeting. I just start listening. I start taking a few notes. Like, what am I hearing? I start playing that back, and they're like, oh, yeah, that's a good insight. And then I start doing it again, and they're like, hey, Liz, could you lead the next meeting? I'm like, yeah, I can do that. Lead the next meeting. After about 3 of these sessions, they conclude that, we can't have 12 authors of the corporate strategy. Like, we need many thinkers, but a single author. And they're like, Liz, we need you to author the corporate strategy. And I did. I'm like, I'm not sure I know how to do that, but why not give that a try? And it was probably the most important piece of work I did for the company. It really changed not just the trajectory of our training program, really the trajectory of the whole company. But it wasn't work I was asked to do. It was work I had to invite myself to the party. Sometimes you have to invite yourself to the party. And just because your presence wasn't requested doesn't mean it's not wanted, right? Just like there, it's like it was wanted, it was valuable, no one had thought to ask, hey, Liz, can you do this thing? Like, just because you're not, planned doesn't mean you're not welcomed. And for those of you who have a caboose child like I do, you know the difference between those two, right? Number 3, if you want to finish strong, make sure you know where the finish line is. Like, how do we know? Next time you're taking on a piece of work, you might ask, how will we know we're done, all the way done? You might, if you get fuzzy direction, you might say, what does a great job look like? How will I know that I've done something really impactful and amazing? And for those of you in leadership roles, if you haven't done that when you give someone a challenge or a piece of work, like, let them know what success looks like. It's remarkable how infrequently this is talked about. But just because someone doesn't give it to you doesn't mean you can't ask. It's like getting a statement of work. Like Sean Vanderhoffer, ask for feedback first. Don't wait for someone to give you feedback. Beat them to the punch. Hey, what could I have done differently? What's one thing that would have made this report stronger? What would have made that presentation stronger? Make it easy for someone to give you guidance. Maybe you create a user's guide to you. If you want someone to use you, kind of like I wanted to be useful and use like my synthesis and pattern recognition to see if I could help, like, don't wait for someone to discover you. Say, hey, you know what? Here's what I'm good at. Here's what I do. Here's what I could do for you. Kind of like, this is how you use me. Create a user's guide. And then lastly, put on opportunity goggles. One of the things that we found that these impact players just do differently than others is they see uncertainty differently. They see threat differently. They see uncertainty and threat through an opportunity lens rather than through a threat lens. Like sort of by metaphor, if they see a bee, a logical reaction is, okay, there might be a swarm of bees, let me run, versus, I'm noticing like who's allergic to bees right now, because their body just did something very different than everyone else's body. As they look at that and they're like, okay, yeah, that could be threatening, but like maybe there could be a swarm of bees, and maybe this is an opportunity to build honey, and let's go to generate honey, let's go build a hive. They're constantly looking at this. One of my friends, actually someone who read the book, sent me these. She called them impact player goggles. It's like they just look at things through this lens, not of optimism, not of sunshine, not a delusional lens, but how do I find an opportunity to add value? This might be an opportunity to take lead, which causes them to do something very different when they see ambiguity and uncertainty. So what do you do when you're at the beach and you see a wave coming at you, and it's a big wave? You ride it? Anyone want to guess what I do? I run. So, when I'm a native Californian, I get to the beach, I see the big wave coming in, I'm like, oh yeah, that's going to toss me. Let me back up. Like that doesn't work well through sand, does it? Or when you turn this way and you try to run, like inevitably the wave takes me, tumbles me. I finally get myself right back up just in time for the next wave. Okay, now how does a surfer do this? How does my favorite child? When they see a big wave, they don't move away from it, they move into it. They like control that energy, they cut through it to the other side. Like if I could sum up what I found impact players do differently, is they see opportunity where others see threat. And when situations feel out of their control, big and scary, they simply step toward them rather than away from them. So maybe you just use this simple practice of like when something looks out of your control, just like, okay, what if I were to just put on the opportunity goggles? Like, what does this look like through the lens of opportunity? And how do I take this situation and turn it into an opportunity to add value? Okay. My hope is some of you have thought, oh, you know what? Maybe I'm working on this path of impact. Maybe these are the things I'm already doing. Let me do more of it. Some of you might say, I've maybe slipped off of this, and now I can create more value for myself and for others. What I want to do is talk about your role as a leader. How do you build a high impact team? Like how can you build a team where everyone's thinking and working this way? Can't necessarily build a team where everyone's an MVP, but can't you build a team where everyone is creating impact in their role and beyond their role? So what do you need to do so that people are willing to step up and do hard things, step into ambiguity, continue to fail? Like, what does the leadership model look like to create impact players? Some of you have seen this video before. It's a young man named Arat and his father. What kind of leadership, coaching do you need so that people can do this?
Enfin. Baik bola. Mijunya. File timbul. Baca. Okey. Bola.
I could just keep watching that over and over. Like what does a leader need to do that allows people to step up and do something that is uncomfortable and hard and beyond their abilities? Like what do leaders do that, incent that, or maybe even demand that? And what do leaders do that keep people from trying? Keep people in their comfortable boxes doing their job, waiting to be told, waiting for an invitation to lead, rather than going where you might not be necessarily invited, but wanted. I'm going to ask you to be thinking about that through your own experience. I want you to go back to when you're in these modes, that contributor mode and impact player mode. And particularly like a time when you were going through the motions and maybe felt underutilized. Would we describe it? Frustrating, exactly. Versus a time that you're making a big impact, and that you're deeply engaged in the work, where work feels exhilarating, not exhausting. And I've got 3 different questions for you this time. The questions are, what did your leader do in each of these 2 situations? What were their assumptions? Because the leader plays a role in this. And then what percentage of your capability did they get? Now, for those of you who've been here over the past 4 years, we've kind of talked about some of this, like leaders who have a diminishing effect on people's impact and leaders who have a multiplying effect. So I'm asking you, what was the leader doing in each of these situations? Will you just talk that through? Now, the bottom is I'd love for you to come up with a percentage. Like, what percentage of your capability was that leader getting access to? And what I mean by that is like how much of your intellect, your talent, your capability, your know-how, your skill, your God-given talents, how much of that was being used by the leader based on the way the leader was operating, okay? Do you want some time to kind of jot down ideas, or do you just want to go right into the conversation? Right in? Okay, I feel like maybe I pressured people to go right in. Someone's like, I'm like the introverts in the room are like, oh, you don't understand me. If you want some time to gather your thoughts, do that. Put your partner on hold for a second. But would you take another 4 minutes, like 2 per person? I'll give you a flag midway through that. And just describe in that moment in time, what was the leader doing in each situation? What's their assumption? How much of your capability do they get? We'll probably do 2 or 3 minutes per person. I'll give you a signal about 2 or 3 minutes in. Okay, go. Okay, can I ask you to just put a pause on that conversation, because we are going to continue it as a full group. Describe what the leaders were doing when you were in contributor mode. What kind of things was the leader doing? They were micromanaging, surefire way to put someone in contributor mode. What else? They were checking boxes themselves. Maybe checking to see if other people were checking boxes. What else? They punish failure. Yeah, perfectionist orientation and punishing failure is a surefire way to keep people sticking to what they know how to do. They didn't communicate the agenda. Yeah, they're kind of like keeping the agenda mysterious. Like some people are really good about going in and going, okay, I see the agenda. Agendas tend to be invisible. They're rarely written down. But the best managers say, like, here's the agenda. Let me tell you about one little experience. My daughter's sister-in-law calls me up, and I'm like, oh, I'm surprised to get a phone call from Tiffany. And she said, Liz, I've been reading Impact Players, and I was reading that part about the agenda. And she said, I had a meeting with my boss that day, and my boss just mentioned her 3 priorities. And she says, normally, that would have just kind of rolled in, rolled out. And she said, that's the agenda. She just told me the agenda. So you know what Tiffany did? She leads the design team in this ad company. She went back, wrote those down, started to write out, well, for us to realize those priorities, this has to happen and this has to happen. She started lay out contingency plans. She goes and talks to her peers in the organization. Hey, for us to do this, what would have to happen here? She kind of lays that out. The next week, she meets with her boss and she said, I noticed you mentioned these 3 priorities. Well, I just kind of put this together. What do you think her boss did? She's speechless. Tiffany had called me a week later when her boss called her in and gave her an enormous promotion and an enormous raise. She says, it was more money than I thought I would ever make in my whole life. And she says, I feel like I should give you a commission on this. And I'm like, sweetheart, you keep that money for yourself. You earned every bit of it. But it started when the boss said, here's the agenda. Here's what's important. Here's what's important now. Here's what's important this week, today. Okay, what else did the boss do when you were stuck in contributor mode? They boxed in the responsibility to just argue. Yeah, they're kind of like managing to the org chart. Your job, their job. They're boxing people in. Nobody likes job descriptions. If you are like spending all your time trying to get all those roles clarified, you're probably boxing your team rather than releasing them to be able to do impact. Okay, what were they assuming to be true? That they were all dumbasses. Thank you for just going straight to it. I can't even who said that, but thank you. Thank you for that. Now, was the assumption true? But I have to say, I get in this mode where I'm like, and it keeps people just doing the minimum. Underutilized. What percentage of your capability did they get from you? Can we just add up like this row? Would you just give me the percentage? 80? Yeah, 75? 7? 7? 60? 60? 75? 40? Thank you for being honest. 60%. How much of your capability were you wanting to give? So I've spent years studying leaders who underutilize talent and get a fraction of people's capability. You know, I call these leaders diminishers. It tends to be like less than half of people's capability, but what's interesting is what people really want to give. What did you want to give in that situation? Yeah, from day one? What percentage of your capability did you want to give? Everyone's like, do I tell the truth here? Yeah, like what percentage of your capability, when you take a job, what percentage of your talent and capability are you wanting to contribute? It tends to be 100%. And I've like asked people all around the world. I can't find an industry in which that's not true. But what happens when people keep you stuck in a box? What does that number eventually go to? It looks sort of like an asymptote. It eventually goes down to near nothing, like just enough to not get fired. Okay, how about that time when you were really making an impact, deeply engaged? What was the leader doing there? They were trust. Okay, so let's start with the behavior first, and then we're going to get to the assumption. Or give me the behavior behind trust. What does it look like behaviorally when the leader is like messaging, I trust you? They empower. Okay, let's get a little bit more behavior on that, if we would. Like, what does it look like to empower someone? Because I don't think they were like sprinkling lavender fairy dust. Like, you're empowered. Like, what were they doing? They asked, what do you think about this? What else did they do to signal, I'm giving you power? They stepped back. They give you feedback. They let you make a mistake. What else were they doing that generated this kind of impact? They're moving things out of your way. Sometimes, though, perhaps leaving them in your way. What happens when the leader's always removing obstacles? I know a lot of leaders who operate on this, like, my job is to remove obstacles. I mean, let's just go to the obvious thing. What does that look like on a football field? Like, you know what? No obstacles in this practice. Like, we're clearing the way. It's just a green field. Run. Yeah, you guys know what that looks like, but what happens when a leader just clears all the obstacles for people? Yeah, you don't get better. And what gets messaged? Now, the leader should clear, like, difficult obstacles. Absolutely. But what happens if that's their mentality? Like, let me make it easy for people. Let me remove the obstacles. What is it saying? You can't do this. Or like, it's above your pay grade. You can't lift boulders this heavy. I'll do the heavy lifting. You do the easy stuff. And then what do you get eventually? Yeah, you get complacent people who are like, hey, my job is to move the pebbles, not the boulders. Yeah. What did the leader assume? This time when you felt like you were really making a big impact, operating in this impact player mentality, what was their assumption? That you're valuable. Yeah, it's hard to add value if you don't have leaders who see that you have that you can. They see that you're valuable, that you can figure it out, that that they can learn from you. And that is what I heard when leaders describe the impact players on their team. Like, man, these are people I want to be like. These are people I learn from. These aren't just even peers. Like, these are people that I kind of revere. What percentage of your capability was being used? Should we go back to this group? There's a comment here.
Well, I was going to say, you asked when we took a job, what we really wanted to give. And I'm guessing that it's a cliche, but 110% is really the answer because we didn't want to just work at the job. We wanted to improve. And so after we did that job, we would be better than we were.
I hope everyone heard that was a really important comment about 110%. When I did this original research, kind of looking at these diminishing leaders versus multiplier leaders, leaders who either cause people to hold back and underutilize people versus leaders who create an environment where people can add value, fully contribute, make an impact. When I asked them, what percentage of your capability did the multiplier get? They're like, 110%. I'm like, not useful, because actually what I want to know is of your intelligence and capability, how much did they get? And I don't want, gave it the college try, left it all in the field, I gave it 110%. I want to know how much of your capacity was being used. And they're like 110%. And then I'm like, first I have to admit I was kind of annoyed by this, and I like capped all of the answers at 100%. And it wasn't until someone came along and said, well, Liz, like, why did you do that? Like, don't you think there's a message there? And so I went back and looked at those interview transcripts, called up some people, and their story was exactly that. They're like, they got 110% of my capability because not only did they get everything that I had, I was learning and growing so much working for them that the scale changed. It's interesting. Yeah, most of us don't really want to contribute 100% of our capability. We want 110. We want a growth dividend from the job.
Question.
Yes.
Apologize if I'm skipping ahead, but in your research, are there certain compensation models that kind of align to drive like an impact culture, and not like a specific dollar amount, but like tying compensation to?
So the question was, were there compensation models that seem to be associated with people being able to contribute fully? And I don't have an answer for that, but one of the things I was struck by is in all of my interviews where I'm not asking the multiplier leaders what they were doing, I'm asking the people who work for them. What did that leader do? It's actually way better data this way. And one of the things I was struck by is not once did compensation come up. And I had to go back and look through my notes and everything. It's like, it wasn't driven by compensation. But are there some ways that people would be compensated to pull people more into this impact player mode? Absolutely, I think there are. I don't have an expertise in this, so I don't have an answer for you. But you know, someone read the book, and their takeaway I thought was so interesting, is they said like their takeaway was one idea from the book, which when you write a book, you're like, I'm just happy if it's one. You know, one idea that people take, and there was like, we need to stop thinking about people in terms of like their performance and think about like measuring impact and like helping people make an impact. So I think that there are ways to do that. Not my expertise though. So we found that these diminisher and multiplier leaders do a few things very differently. The first is how they manage talent. You know, one tends to be an empire builder. They love to hire good talent, but they like keep them in little boxes, versus the talent magnet, the leaders everyone wants to work for, because you grow around these people. It's 110% kind of engagement. They see people not for just their outward skills or their resume. They see like their native genius. Like, here's what I do easily and freely. And these are the people we love to go and work for. We get better around them. We get fully utilized around them. You know, the second difference is how the work environment they create. You know, diminishers tend to be kind of a bit of a tyrant, not yelling, hot-headed tyrants, but just leaders who exude stress. Like when you think about like everything we talked about with impact players, like being able to step into situations that feel like they're out of your control, they're ambiguous, they're uncertain. What happens when you layer in stress to that? No, thank you. I'm just going to stay in my box where it's safe. You know, the way they give direction, you know, the diminisher tends to be a know-it-all. They tell people what to do. The multiplier tends to be a challenger. They give people stretch challenges. Instead of saying, I need you to do this, it's, what would it take for us to be able to do this? It's a very different kind of way of giving people objectives and challenges. It gets the brain going. You know, instead of making decisions, they tend to lead debate. Instead of micromanaging situations, they give other people ownership and responsibility, and they keep it there. But of everything we found, I think the thing that was most interesting, and we're going to like maybe take about 15 minutes to wrap up our conversation here, is that most of the diminishing that we found is happening inside of organizations is not being done by the tyrannical, bully, narcissistic kind of leader. Like you've all had experience with one of them in the workplace, maybe on the field. I mean, they're obvious. In some ways, I don't worry about these kind of leaders because you can steer away from them. They get a reputation. No one wants to work for them. But we found that most of the diminishing that's happening is coming from what I call the accidental diminisher. The leader who is operating with the best of intent, maybe even noble intent, but is yet having a diminishing impact. I want to share with you a little bit of background on one of my favorite leaders, not just a favorite athlete, but a favorite leader. I think this helps us see, first of all, what multiplier leadership really looks like and how easily we can become the accidental diminisher. Now, I've probably shared his experience with you. Does anyone remember? This was like 3 years ago that we talked about it. Anyone remember sort of like this kind of turning point in this young man's experience? Of course, some people are like, who is this? This is Magic Johnson, of course, but this is before he is Magic Johnson. He is a high school player, phenomenally talented, and of course, he's not known as Magic Johnson, then he is Irvin Johnson II, Irvin Johnson Jr., and he has this experience that really shapes him. Does anyone remember this? Maybe I didn't talk about it. I did, thank you. You sounded so disappointed, though. I mean, that's what concerned me. You're like, you talked about it. What do you remember?
It was something about him making other players around him better. Like he could dominate the game if I'm remembering it correctly, but his job was to make everybody around him better.
Absolutely. Does anyone want to add to that? Anything else you remember about this? And partially just to make me feel good that you remembered something that I shared. I know. And I'm like, well done. Everyone needs to like applaud Wally, like, thank you. But there's a little bit more too. Does anyone want to add to it? His coach says something to him. He says, okay, so he's this phenomenally talented athlete, and his coach says to him, Irvin, every time you get the ball, I want you to... Okay, I want you to go back to high school. So I imagine some of you played high school basketball as well. Okay? What would the coach say to him? You got this phenomenally talented athlete. And I want you to like imagine being this kid's coach. Okay, so are we going to be honest? Yeah, the coach didn't say pass it. The coach said every time you get, I mean, we want him to have said pass it, don't we? It would sound so good. It's a different story. In this story, he says, every time you get the ball, you take the shot. So he does. Coach loves it because he's this really coachable kid and he's phenomenally talented. Now the other players love it too. Why? They're winning. They're undefeated. Like no one can beat them with this, this little phenom on their team. And they would win with, let's say, like 54 points. And he would have scored 50 or 52 of those points. But everyone loves it. And it's going on game after game after game. And then there's this one particular game, nothing special, not a championship game, just a game. They win. They celebrate. Celebration's coming to the end. And the other players are now leaving the gymnasium with their parents. And this young man, I just can't believe, like, I've had teenage boys. Like, I'm so impressed that like he saw this. What did he notice? He noticed the faces of the parents, who of course came there to see what? Their kid play. You know, like, yeah, they might have appreciated, like, we love that we're winning, but I want to see my kid play. And of course, what they got was some like early version of like Showtime Magic, which was probably fun the first couple games. But what he saw on their faces, and he didn't say what that was. I don't know if it was just disappointment. I don't know if it was anger, resentment, but it like got inside of him. And he said that he made a decision as a teenage kid. Like, I'm going to use my God-given talent to help everyone on the team be a better player. Okay. It was a reorientation for him. It was actually this reorientation that earns him this nickname of Magic, given to him by a Michigan sports writer who said, it's like uncanny, he raises the level of play of every team that he plays on. And here's why I think this like is emblematic of this multiplier way of leading, is he didn't then say, okay, well, let me just cheer on my team, you know, most inspirational from the sidelines. He didn't play small, he plays huge, right? Some of you have seen him play. Plays huge, but he does it in a way that allows other people to play huge, and maybe even invites it or demands it. Like, how are you playing as a leader? Are you playing in a way that invites everyone around you to play at the best? Or are you kind of the impact player for your team? Which is, I'll step up, I'll do the hard stuff. Are you allowing everyone to play at their very best? But I also think, and the reason why I share this story again, like this really affected me when I heard it, is it illustrates how easy it is to end up the accidental diminisher. Doing what you have been asked to do, told to do, coached to do, celebrated for doing, like being a star, feels good to be the impact player. But then maybe shutting down impact and contribution for people around you. So here's what I want to do as we kind of wrap up our time together, is I want to share with you the ways that we can end up the accidental diminisher, with the very best of intentions, contributing and leading in a way that causes other people to just stay in a box. Do the minimum. There are 9 of them. I'm going to show you a set of pictures, and what I hope is maybe over the next 5-7 minutes as we go through this, that you identify one thing that you might be doing with really good intentions that's shutting down other people. Keeping them over on the contributor mindset rather than the impact player mindset. Each of these, you're going to see 2 pictures. The first is the intention of the leader. Like, this is the positive intent. The picture on the right is the experience other people tend to have around you. Now, I start with idea fountain because this is my big accidental diminisher tendency. So the idea fountains, like, we are creative, innovative thinkers. We love ideas. Like, we want, you know, like every day, like a day with a brainstorm session is a good day. And like, we burst into the office, hey, what about this? Have you thought about this? Have you tried this? Maybe we should do this. What about that? And of course, we think that it's not that we think our ideas are better. We think that our ideas are going to spark other ideas. But what happens when the leader is a fountain of ideas? What's the experience like for people around them? Yeah, like, well, maybe my idea isn't good. Like, I'll just like hold back. What else do we tend to do around the idea fountains? What's the experience like for others? It's distracting. It looks a little bit like this. Like, okay, Liz has got me doing this, now she's got me doing this, and people end up running around chasing ideas. And then what do you end up at the end of the day going, I end up back here at square one, so I'll just stay here. And like, what do we tell ourselves when actually we need like good ideas and creativity? We're like, well, I can think real hard, or I can just walk down the hallway to the fountain of ideas and like get my ideas there, because like that thing goes off every hour, so that'll be my source of ideas. What about the always on leader? Big energy, big presence, like they're bringing it. And I know some of you here have learned to do this, right? And your training as athletes kind of takes you down this path. Like, woo, okay, we're doing it, this is great. Like this, I'm so grateful for this. Woo, this is gonna be great. We're game ready. What happens when the leader brings the energy? What happens when the leader is always on? Of course, they think they're energizing their team. It's exhausting. Yeah, it's exhausting. It's like, you're killing me with this. It's draining. What do we do when the always on leader or colleague is on the approach? What do we do when they're coming down the hallway to our office, or you see them, their name on your phone? What do? You do the skedaddle, don't you? You know, it's like, ooh, you know, or you look at your phone because you're like, oh, I've got a very important text message right now. Because you don't want to make eye contact with these people, do you? No, it's like, you know, for fear of activating them. This is the universal response to always on kinds of leaders. Okay, what happens when the leader is always on? They're creating this burden for other people. They're like expanding like a gas, taking up all the space. Well, are people going to end up adding to the burden or making work light? Like, you're saying, I'm going to make work harder for everyone else. Like, don't be surprised that it generate that kind of impact. What about the rescuer? Big-hearted leader, cares about people, loves people, wants people to be successful. When you see someone struggling, what do you tell yourself? And I don't mean struggling emotionally, like someone who needs a hug. I'm talking about someone who's struggling with a tough piece of work. Let me help. This is going to let that person know how much I value them, my help. But what happens when the leader is helpful too early? Too often? Yeah, and it looks a little bit like this for the person getting the rescue. Now, we think, some of you have been on both sides of this, haven't you? We think that by rescuing someone, what we're saying to them is, I care about you. I want you to be successful. But when we rescue someone who is struggling with a tough piece of work, what is the subtext of our action? What's the message that actually gets sent? You can't handle this. You can't do it. And it's actually the essence of diminishing logic is like, you won't figure this out without me. Yeah, and nobody grows around these kind of leaders. They're like leaders who, they're not getting 110%, they're like getting a fraction of your capability, and it's declining every day. As you get kind of stagnant around these leaders, it's happened to me. You know, leaders who are really good at something did it for me, and I'm like, well, you do all of that then, and suddenly I'm not very capable. The pace-setting leader, this is the driven, achievement-oriented leader. They're like getting out in front of their team. Like, let me show you what it looks like. I'll show you what like great looks like. I'll get ahead. People will notice what I'm doing, and they will follow suit, right? They will just follow. That's the logic. What actually happens when the leader sets the pace for his or her team? What happens?
You wave goodbye as they go away.
Yeah, you're like, you know, like next time you lap me,
Yeah.
like check in, I'd love to help. But yeah, it looks a little bit like this. People, see, when we set the pace for our team, we're more likely to generate spectators than followers. Because people hold back when they can't win. Here's a little litmus test. If you might have some pace setter tendencies, which of the dogs represents you as the leader? Yeah, see, again, people want to contribute. They want to help. They want to do work that matters. People crave impact, but if they can't catch up, they can't contribute, people just hold back. What about the rapid responder, the person who's on it? See a problem, solve a problem. See a bear, shoot a bear. Is this kind of way of operating? What happens when the leader is quick to jump in, quick to answer an email note, quick to respond to a text, a Slack, quick to jump on a problem or an opportunity? What is the experience like for other people? It kills growth, and other people are just like, okay, well, you know what? Let's let her handle that. What about the optimist? Now, my guess is this room is probably full of a lot of optimists. This is one of my accidental diminisher tendencies. I had to learn this the painful way, that my team didn't appreciate my helpful, can-do attitude. Because what happens when the leader sees victory. They see possibilities. We got this. We can do this. We can do hard things. First of all, I know it kind of diminishes their credibility. Like, okay, Liz has lost her tether to reality. I know that it does that. How does it end up diminishing other people? How does it diminish impact? How does it diminish innovation? It doesn't acknowledge the challenge, and it doesn't acknowledge the struggle. Like, what happens when people's like, I once had a colleague finally say to me, Liz, I need you to stop saying that. And he was like fed up, done with me. And I'm like, saying what? He goes, oh, the thing you say all the time. I'm like, what's that? He goes, oh, we can do this. This can't be that hard. I'm like, oh, I do say that all the time. And he said, yeah. And I explained to him, that's my way of saying, I think we're smart and capable and can do hard things. And he goes, yeah, that's the thing I need you to stop saying. And I said, why? And he said, Liz, because what we're doing is hard. It's really hard. And as my boss, I need you to acknowledge it. See, I was so convinced, I thought I was being like helpful, and actually it was kind of being hurtful. Like I've changed a lot as a leader. I've learned a whole like new vocabulary. I know some of you don't have this vocabulary, so I'll give it to you. And it's saying things like, what we're doing is really hard. We're going to struggle with this. We're going to make mistakes with this. And then I know this is anathema to a lot of people in this room. You have to say things like, yeah, we may not win this one. This one might not be a victory. Like, we might really screw this up. And it's amazing how people go, okay, thank you. Okay, let's go do it. Let's go do it. What about the protective leader who's like a banyan tree, like that provides comfort and shade? Like when the work is hard, like, okay, you know what? I'll do the hard stuff. I'll have the hard conversations. I'll deal with the difficult people, the difficult customers. And I'm shielding you from this. Yeah, it stunts growth. The problem is nothing grows under those leaders. Like, people need some obstacles. Not a whole path full of them, but people need obstacles to grow. What about the big, bold thinker who does so much big picture thinking that nobody else has to, and they wonder why is everyone kind of thinking and working in silos? Maybe you've done too much of the big thinking for your team. And lastly, the perfectionist who loves to get it exactly right, and it feels so good. But how does it feel like to work for a perfectionist? Yeah, their experience feels more like this. Okay, so here's the last conversation I hope that we have before we wrap up our time together is, what might be your accidental diminisher tendency? I haven't found someone who doesn't have one. Now, I'm not suggesting that if you do these things, you're having a diminishing impact. I don't know that. We'd have to talk with the people on your team. But having this tendency just makes us vulnerable to it. But these are the kind of things that leaders do with the best intention, that they never see the diminishing impact because they're, of course, seeing their positive intent while everyone else is seeing the effect of their actions. Would you go, back to part, and feel free to stand up. I know we've been sitting a long time. And would you just take a couple minutes and just share, here's what my accidental diminisher tendency might be. It's a hypothesis. And while you're doing that, I'm going to put up this. Well, no, let's not do that. Let's just go back to this. Keep it simple. Would you just share what your accidental diminisher tendency might be? This is, by the way, practice, because the best leaders talk about these on their team. Because if your team knows you have rescuer tendencies, what does it enable them to do? Give you the straight arm and say, you know what? Hey, Liz, I appreciate the help, but I'll get this thing done. Cheer for me when I'm done, but I got this thing. Okay, 2 minutes. What's your accidental diminisher tendency? Go. Okay, I'm gonna ask you to just temporarily pause that. It is a conversation I hope continues. And maybe it continues with a buddy here. Maybe it continues at home. Maybe there's a roommate that you should have this conversation with, maybe a family member. But I mostly hope it continues on your team. The most powerful way to be this multiplier kind of leader is to not like leave it all to yourself to figure out how do I avoid my accidental diminisher tendencies. It's to be so open about these ways that your best intent goes awry that people will help you abate that. If people know you're an idea guy, everyone on my team knows this about me. They're like, when I get into this mode, people say, hey Liz, like, do you want us to do something with these, or are you just having your little idea party right now? It's an idea party, like it'll end. And it allows your team to know that they can step up and play big, maybe when you might be doing something that's causing them to hold back. As we just wrap up, I want to share a few things that you can do to be a multiplier leader, to really allow people to contribute fully and to have a bigger impact around you. Now, the first thing you might want to do, particularly if anyone has a lot of always on kind of energy, anyone who's an idea guy in the room, maybe what you do is you go into a meeting, a conversation where you have a tendency to over-contribute, and you take what I call the poker chip challenge, or quarters, whatever you want to do. And it's a very different use of the quarters game, I should point out, is you go into this conversation and you say, you know, I'm going to budget myself. Each chip represents something I say or contribute. And instead of taking up a lot of space, maybe you dispense your ideas in very small but intense doses. You know, maybe you open up the meeting with a chip. Maybe you ask a big question. Maybe you issue a challenge. Maybe you save a chip to kind of wrap up the conversation, and you create space for other people to play bigger. You know, the best leaders, they play big, but they also know when to play small. If you want to really empower someone, I'm going to give you a shorthand for doing that, is to let someone know when it comes to this part of the business, when it comes to this project, when it comes to this decision, you have 51% of the vote. John Chambers said that when he hired a vice president into his company. When it comes to this part of the business, Doug, you get 51% of the vote in this area and 100% of the accountability. What does it say when you give someone 51% of the vote? It's you. You're in charge. We're going to back you. But he didn't give him 100% of the vote. He gave him 51, which says, use your team. Consult with me. Keep me informed. Listen to other people. But you own this. It paves a way for people to have impact. Maybe you give the pen back. One of the multiplier leaders that I study, oh God, one of my favorites, Choi. I hired him right out of Stanford here, and he was an amazing leader when I worked with him at Oracle. He went on to be this amazing leader at McKinsey, and he described this moment. And he said, Liz, when your people are struggling, it's irresponsible not to help. Like, yeah, maybe people need a little rescue, but you've got to remember to hand the pen back. And he described this meeting where they're trying to put this presentation together for this really important client. This is McKinsey consulting firm in Seoul, Korea. And the team is stuck, and they're spinning their wheels, and they've got tons of data, but they don't see this clear message. And the project leader's up at the board trying to map this out, struggling, and finally they turned to Jay, who was the managing director for the office. And Jay's been sitting in the back, kind of quiet, listening. And they're like, hey, Jay, like, we could use some help here. Hands the pen to Jay. Jay comes up to the board and starts to map out kind of a storyboard for the pitch. The presentation's the next day, and it's 2 o'clock in the morning. Okay, we've all been in some version of this. Like, they're in desperate straits. He's laying it out. Okay, here's sort of the data. Here's some themes. You can imagine what the people in the room are thinking. Like, if they're chanting something, what is it? Go, Jay, go, 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 go. Round the bases. Bring this thing home. But this, like, multiplier mentality that's just so part of who he is, it just caused him to stop. He stops midway through the thinking, and he said, here are a few ideas to get you unstuck. Why don't you see what you can do with this? And then he hands the pen back to the project leader, and he sits down. Yeah, okay, some people might need some help, but got to remember to hand the pen back. What does the pen mean? It represents power, control, ownership. If you want people to step into situations that feel like they're out of their control, make sure that they've got the pen. Keep giving them, reminding them, you're in charge. Take charge. You know, don't hand it back. Maybe if you want greater innovation, make space for mistakes. You might say, you know, in this part of our work, you know what? honestly, we can't be super innovative. These are like freeways. We have to be very careful about being a few degrees off. Over here, these are playgrounds. This is where you can try things, innovate, make mistakes. As Jeremy said, iterate many times, learn, fail, grow. Separate the playgrounds from the freeways. Maybe the most important thing you can do to build a team of impact players is to just operate in stretch challenges. Give people things that are hard to do, things that are uncomfortable, things that, feel not like giving someone a piece of work, but something that like stretches people, makes them uncomfortable, makes them wobble. And what's the tendency when you see someone struggling and you've given them this challenge? To help them. Or some people get in the mode of just like giving people work. And what does this say to them? That's all I think you can really do. I think true mastery as a leader is to know exactly how much tension to put there. And to, when someone's struggling, to just hold that position and let them figure it out and keep growing. Master the art of the stretch challenge. If you're like, I don't know how much challenge people can handle, what do? Ask them. Maybe the question you ask is, what's the degree of challenge that you're ready for right now? What's the hard thing you wish we were asking you to do? What's the impact you wish you could make right now? Are you ready for a new challenge? Or right now, do you need to kind of catch your breath? Give people challenges. And maybe, the universal thing that we can all do to help people operate with greater impact and higher levels of contribution is, instead of telling people what to do, we just ask questions and invite other people to step into those spaces. Maybe you take what I call the extreme question challenge. Maybe you go into a meeting and you say, I have questions here, not answers. And you ask people questions and let them step into that uncomfortable space and find the answers. When I boil down everything I've learned about multiplying leaders versus diminishing leaders, I find that the best leaders do two things. They create two simultaneous conditions, and my guess is everyone in the room knows exactly what happens when a coach, a leader can do this. One, they create safety, intellectual safety, psychological safety. They make it safe for people to try. They give them the right size challenge. They make that safe. But they don't just leave it there. What's it like to work for someone who's all safety, but no stretch? What's it like to work for someone who's all stretch, no safety? The best leaders bring these things together, and they create in any given day or meeting just enough safety that people are willing to stretch. If you want people to stretch and have greater impact, create safety, but don't leave it there. Create stretch challenges. There's a little video that I was going to share. I don't think we have time to share it. It's my favorite video. I'll maybe play it as we're wrapping up for anyone who wants it. Because, Mark, we need to go, don't we? We do. I'm going to take the we do part of that, and I'm not going to share this. He's such a nice guy. Is what, when the leader chooses to operate not as the genius of their team, when they choose to be the genius maker, the multiplier to the team, what it allows the people on the team to do is to move beyond being a position holder and really operate as a difference maker in the organization. It's my hope that something we talked about today will help you be more of a difference maker, and that you'll multiply that and create a work environment where people can contribute fully and be difference makers, not just job holders. Just thank you. Thank you for participating. Thank you for telling us about Irvin Johnson.